What's going on, engineers? Next on our list for HTML and CSS learnings is common HTML tags and what they're used for. For this video, we're going to take CSS, we're just going to put it aside for the most part. We're going to focus primarily on just HTML tags. Now there's somewhere around like 90 or 100 HTML tags in total, but we're not going to look at all of them today. We're going to look at about 15 of the most common ones. For most websites, about 90% of the tags that are used you're going to see in this video. So let's get started. In the first HTML and CSS video I did, we talked about what HTML and CSS was for, and we talked about what a minimal document would look like. So we're going to start with that same document for this video, which is a simple HTML tag, inside of that a head and body tag. I am including a small CSS file, but you can ignore that entirely. Its only purpose is just to make what we're making dark theme. The first two tags we're going to look at are the style and script tags, and these two tags, they are typically located inside of the head tag, but it's not strictly required. You can put them in the body tag as well if you wanted. The style tag is used for defining styles. It can be used in lieu of a CSS file. If I wanted to, I could go into main.css, I could copy and paste all of the styles out of it and into the style tag, and they would have the exact same effect. As far as the script tag, it works the exact same way as the style tag, except it's for JavaScript. Instead of including a JavaScript file, if you wanted to just include your code directly into your HTML document, you could include it between script tags and it would execute as soon as it got to it. However, if you wanted to include JavaScript from a file, you can simply do a source attribute and then specify the name of the file, and then that will import it. For the remaining tags we're going to look at, they're all related to the actual rendering of visual aspects in the browser, and that means we're going to put them all inside the body tag. The first tag we're going to look at is the div tag, and the div tag can be thought of as the most common generic container for various purposes, whether that's text or other elements. What the div ultimately looks like is based entirely on how you style it. Of course, we haven't styled it at all here. However, because each tag has implied styles, that is, the browser will look at the tag and say, okay, well, I don't see anything styled here, so I'm going to apply a certain style to it. The div and a couple tags we're going to look at after this are what's called block level elements, which means by default they are 100% wide, filling the either parent element or the screen in this case, and their height is just going to be whatever the height of the content is. Just so you can visualize what this element looks like, I briefly added a CSS style to it to make the background red. And you can see over here, it's 100% wide and it contains text inside it. Next tag we're going to look at is for title headings, and it's going to be H1 through H6, a total of 6 tags. Now, like a div, this is a block level element, but the browser is going to give it top and bottom margin, and then it's going to give it a small or large size depending on whether it's H1 through H6. So an H1, of course, is going to be the largest. We can see that here, text is quite large, and then H6 is going to be the smallest. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, how come I can't just take title text, put it in a div, and make it larger and make it bold? And the answer is you absolutely can. The reason you want to prefer an H3 or an H4 tag over a div is because it's not enough to just make your website look properly, you also want it to be semantically accurate in the way it's structured. For instance, programs that read HTML will know that an H1 through H6 is supposed to be a title irrespective of whether or not it's styled to look like one. Whereas a div that's styled to look like a title will still just be a div. Next tag is a P tag, and it stands for paragraph. This tag is intended to contain blocks of text, and here again, you could use a div for this, but if you have a block of text, using the P tag is going to be more semantically accurate. The next tag is the BR tag, which will insert a line break. And the reason the BR tag is even necessary in the first place is because by default HTML trims all trailing and leading whitespace, and then all sequences of whitespace between elements are seen as one single space. So let's look back at the H3 tag again. So if I have chase page here, if I put a bunch of spaces here, it's actually the exact same content. You can see it doesn't change on the right. If I insert additional spaces here, same thing again, it doesn't change. If I put this on a separate thing here, indent it out, it's all the same text. We'll use a BR tag in a little bit and it'll make more sense. The next tag is a span tag, and the span tag is most commonly used for wrapping inline elements for styling. So imagine you had a block of text and you wanted just a couple words to be bold. You could wrap just those 2 words in a span tag and then make them bold. Next tag we're going to look at is an IMG tag, which, as you could probably guess, is for showing an image on the screen. Now this is the first visual tag that we need to actually use a specific attribute, and this is the SRC attribute, which stands for source. And then you'll supply where that image is on the server. And of course, when I save my document, then the picture shows up on the screen. But note what happened here. It took the text I had and then it added the image directly to the right of it. Now, remember I said we're going to use the BR for something real? Well, this is what it is. So because these are 2 inline elements, if I want to get the picture below the text, I have to add a BR right here. And then once I save it, then it goes below it. Until I added that BR, all HTML did was just ignore all the white space and all the new lines, and it just put the two things next to one another. The next tag we'll look at is an A tag, which stands for anchor, and this tag is for creating hyperlinks, which can allow you to link to other pages. So the A tag does take one attribute called href, and then in the href you supply the site that it should go to when the link is clicked. And then inside the A tag you'd specify the text that should actually be displayed on the screen. And you'll notice the browser added this underscore. I did not add this. This is just a browser default. And then of course when I click on the link, it navigates me away to emkc.org. If you want to make it so the link opened up in a different tab, there's a second attribute you can use called target, and then from the options you can select blank. And then now if I refresh the page and I click the link, you can see it opens up in a brand new tab as opposed to navigating away. The next tag is the table tag, which is for doing tabular data. Think like rows and columns. So the tag table has two tags inside it. It has a t-head and a t-body tag. Inside the t-head tag is the tr tag, which is table row. And then inside the table row tag is two th tags, which stand for table header. And this is designed just for the first row, which typically shows the column header names. So like pet name and age. And over here you can see it here, pet name and age. Inside the t-body, we again have another tr, table row, and then inside this we have td tags, which is table data. So for the first cell I have Chase, which goes below pet name, and for the second cell I have 3, which goes below age. And if you wanted to add additional rows, all you would do is just copy and paste the tr tag. And then you can see over here, now I have 3 rows. The next tag is the pre-tag, and you remember earlier when I said that HTML completely ignores white space and none of that matters? Well, the pre-tag is the one exception. Whatever is inside the pre-tag, which stands for pre-formatted text, will show exactly on the screen as you have it written. As you can see over here, the word indented is in fact indented out, and it's indented out the exact amount that is here in the document. The other thing this does is prevents wrapping. Ordinarily when you type text, it will wrap when the screen gets too big for the text. But in the case of the pre-tag, if I take this and I add a bunch of data after it and I click save, you can see that now it gives me the scroll bar and I have to actually scroll out to get to it all. It doesn't wrap to the next line. It's actually showing literally what you've written. This is different, of course, than if I came up here to my original div and I copy and pasted this a bunch of times. You can see that once the text gets too big, then it wraps. So the remaining tags we're going to be looking at all deal with the user actually giving input onto the screen, things like text boxes and buttons and so on. The tags that we've looked at so far, if used with sufficient complexity and enough CSS, you can pretty much make any site any way you want. And in future videos, now that we know how each tag works, we're going to look at actually composing sites with HTML. The first user input tag is going to be the form tag, and typically the form tag will wrap a bunch of input elements. The form tag, when paired with the submit button, allows the posting of data to a various endpoint on a server. How exactly the backend reads and processes it, of course, is out of the scope of this video, but do know that for a form tag, you have 2 attributes primarily. You have the action, which will be the URL it should post the data to, and then the method will be the HTTP verb that it should do, typically get or post. The first input we're going to look at is just a simple text input. This is going to be the input tag with a type equals text. Now note that I wrapped this in a div. I'm doing this because all of the inputs are all inline elements, meaning that they'll all just stack on top of each other. So by using a div, this will allow each one to go on a new line. So if I save this, we look over here, we now have a label called what is your name, and we have a box that we can type some name or whatever. The next input type we're going to look at is a radio input type, and you'll note that the tag is actually the same. They're both input, it's just the type has changed. So in this case, it's type radio. Now, one of the specific ways that the radio buttons work is that it can have either nothing checked, or you can check one or the other. You're not allowed to check both. And that functionality is provided by the browser. As long as you name the 2 radio buttons the same, then the browser will take care of the rest. The next input type is just a drop-down list of options. Now, this is a different tag. This is going to be a select tag, and then inside the select tag is 1 or more option tags. Now, the option tag takes a value attribute as well as something between the tag itself. And there's a subtle difference here. The text that goes between the tag is going to be the text that's actually shown in the dropdown itself. However, the text that's in the value attribute is going to be the thing that's sent to the server if you were to post this form to a server. In many cases, both the value and the text is the same, but not always. Now, the next input is called a text area, and this is a lot like a text input with the exception of a text area can be multiple lines, and then it's also resizable in the browser by default. And then if you type text that's beyond the amount of allowed lines, then it will just scroll. So now I have a scrolling area here. And the last input type is an input type checkbox, and this is going to make a checkbox that can be either checked or not checked. This differs from radio buttons in that if you have 10 checkboxes, you can check either 0 of them, you can check all of them, half of them, it doesn't matter. So use checkboxes if you want people to select 0 or more of something, and use radio buttons if you want somebody to select typically exactly one thing. And then finally, the last element is a button tag, which has a type of typically button or submit. And this gives us a button that people can click to perform some task. Now, the difference between type button and type submit is what it does by default. If it's type submit, when you click the button, it's going to submit the form to the server. It's basically going to post all of the data to the server. If it's of type button, it's going to do absolutely nothing unless you've programmed it to do something. And that's really it for the most common HTML tags that are out there. Now, it might not seem like much, but even really large sites use these exact tags. Now, it's worth reminding that each and every one of these tags can and should be styled with CSS. What you're seeing over on the left is really just how Brave browser is deciding to style it in lieu of any CSS. And in fact, if you run this example on your own machine and you use something like Edge or Firefox, you're very likely to see something different than what you're seeing on this video. Which is really why CSS exists in the first place, is because when you style, say, a button with CSS, you're guaranteed to have it look the same across all the browsers. If you don't style it, then you just get whatever the browser default is. And that's really it. If you have any questions or comments about anything you saw in this video, please make sure to leave them below in the comments. And other than that, I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.